My wife walked out and said I need to find my own happiness after we bought our first house. My name is Evan. I am 33 years old and I live in Ohio. 3 years ago, my wife Lauren and I finally bought our first house after years of saving and planning. It was a small 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood near Columbus, with a maple tree in the front yard and a porch that she had always dreamed of. I thought we were entering the best chapter of our lives. We had been together for 8 years, married for 3, and I believed that everything we had fought for had finally paid off. The first few weeks were full of excitement. We painted the walls together, argued over furniture choices, planted flowers along the walkway, and spent evenings lying on the floor surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. I remember her smiling as she held the house keys and said it finally felt like home. I had no idea she was already drifting away. It started with small changes. Lauren began spending more time alone, going out for walks late at night, and signing up for new activities that didn't include me. She said she was trying to focus on self-growth and wanted space to think. I tried to understand. I thought maybe she was just stressed from work or the pressure of settling into a new life. I didn't realize she was preparing to leave. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of a suitcase being zipped. While I walked into the living room, she was standing by the door, dressed like she was about to catch a flight. I asked where she was going, and she said she needed to find her own happiness. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed. I told her we could work things out, that every couple goes through rough patches, but she just shook her head. She said she felt trapped, that our life had become routine, and she couldn't breathe anymore. Then she opened the door, stepped outside, and drove away. The silence that followed was unbearable. I sat on the couch, staring at the wall, unable to process what had just happened. I thought she would come back the next day, maybe after clearing her head. But days passed, then weeks, and she never returned. Her mother called once to say that Lauren was staying with a friend in Chicago and needed time. I asked if she was okay, and her mother simply said yes, she just needs to rediscover herself. That word haunted me for months. I kept the house exactly as it was, afraid that changing anything would erase her. Her shoes stayed by the door. Her coffee mug sat on the counter. Her favorite sweater still hung behind the bedroom door. Every night, I lay awake replaying our last conversation, wondering what I could have done differently. I didn't eat much, didn't see friends, didn't talk to anyone about it. The house that once felt alive now felt like a museum of everything I lost. 2 months later, a coworker showed me a social media post of her. She was in Denver, smiling beside a man I had never seen before. The caption read, "Finding peace and freedom." That moment shattered me. It wasn't the betrayal that hurt most. It was realizing she had already moved on while I was still holding on to what no longer existed. I stopped checking her pages after that. I deleted her number, blocked her on everything, and forced myself to start over. I began fixing things around the house. I repainted the kitchen, replaced the curtains, built a small fire pit in the backyard. Every repair felt like stitching a wound. I started running again, joined a community basketball team, and reconnected with old friends I had ignored for years. Slowly, the house stopped feeling like ours and started feeling like mine. Almost a year later, I got a message from her. She said she had driven past the neighborhood and saw the maple tree we planted together. She said it looked beautiful and that she hoped I was doing well. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I typed back, "It still is," and deleted the chat. I realized then that happiness isn't something you find by running away. It's something you build where you are, even after everything falls apart. Lauren left searching for herself, but in her absence, I found me. I learned to enjoy quiet mornings, to cook for one, to sit on the porch with coffee and watch the sunrise without feeling lonely. Now, every time I see that maple tree stretching higher into the sky, I think about how growth happens in silence. She left to chase happiness, but I stayed and built peace. The house that once felt like the end of everything became the beginning of who I was always meant to be. And for the first time in my life, I am truly home. 3 weeks after we moved in, I started noticing a distance in her eyes that words couldn't touch. Lauren had always been energetic and expressive, but suddenly she was quiet. She began taking long walks after dinner, saying she needed to clear her head. Sometimes she came back smelling like coffee and rain, sometimes like perfume that wasn't hers. I asked her what was wrong, but she said she just needed space to reconnect with herself. I try not to take it personally, but the silence between us began to stretch longer each night. She changed her wardrobe, started dressing differently, more polished, more deliberate. She began wearing makeup even on Sundays when we stayed home. She said she was trying to feel confident again, but it felt like she was preparing for something I wasn't part of. I told myself she was just adjusting to the new house, the new rhythm, the pressure of adulthood. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. One Friday night, she came home late from work. Her phone lit up with messages while she cooked dinner, and she turned it face down every time I looked at it. I didn't ask questions because I was afraid of the answers. That night, she slept on the edge of the bed, her back to me, her breathing steady but far away. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the faint sound of a zipper. She was in the hallway, coat on, suitcase by her side. The sunlight was coming through the blinds, cutting across her face in stripes. She didn't look at me when I asked what she was doing. She said she needed to find her own happiness, that she couldn't breathe here anymore. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. I stood there frozen, unable to process it. I asked if there was someone else, if I had done something wrong, if we could fix whatever this was. She said it wasn't about me, that she just couldn't keep pretending she was happy. Then she picked up her suitcase, opened the door, and left. No shouting, no crying, just quiet finality. The sound of the door closing was the loudest noise I had ever heard. I sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes we still hadn't unpacked. Her mug was still by the sink, her shoes by the door, her jacket hanging on the chair. Everything felt paused, like the world had stopped moving. I called her once, but she didn't answer. Later that afternoon, her mother called to say Lauren was staying with a friend in Chicago for a while and needed time to think. She said it kindly, as if Lauren had gone on a vacation. I want to believe that too. That night, I walked through every room of the house. Her scent was still on the pillow, her notebook on the counter, her hairbrush on the dresser. The maple tree outside rustled in the wind like it was whispering the truth I didn't want to face. I realized I'd spent months building a dream with someone who had already packed her heart away. The next few days blurred together. I kept the lights off, barely ate, barely spoke. Every sound reminded me of her. The creak of the stairs, the ticking of the clock, the soft hum of the refrigerator. It felt like the house itself was grieving. I checked my phone every hour, hoping for a message that never came. The world went on. People went to work, neighbors mowed their lawns, and I sat in that empty living room trying to figure out how something that felt so solid had collapsed so easily. I had always believed love was about building together, laying bricks one at a time. But that morning showed me how one quiet sentence could bring down an entire home. Weeks turned into months, and the house became quieter than I thought possible. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that reminded me I wasn't completely alone. The mortgage payments still came on time, the grass still grew, and the bills still demanded to be paid. Life didn't stop just because love did. Every time a neighbor waved and asked how we were settling in, I forced a smile and said she was traveling for work. It was easier than explaining that my marriage had ended before it even had time to begin. At first, I tried to convince myself she would come back. I kept her side of the closet untouched, her shoes lined up neatly, her books stacked on the nightstand. I told myself she just needed time, that she would remember the life we had built. But as the days stretched on, her silence became my answer. Then one night, a friend from college sent me a message. He didn't say anything, just attached a photo. It was Lauren, standing in a crowd at a music festival in Denver. She was wearing sunglasses, smiling at the camera, her hand locked with a man I didn't know. He had his arm around her waist like he had always belonged there. The caption under the photo read, "Finding my happiness." I stared at it for a long time. I didn't feel anger at first, just an emptiness so deep it was almost calm. It wasn't the fact that she left that broke me. It was realizing that she had replaced everything we had before the paint on our walls had even dried. All those late-night talks, the shared dreams, the laughter that used to fill our tiny kitchen had already been buried under someone else's smile. The next morning, I went to the courthouse and filed for legal separation. I signed every paper with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I decided to keep the house. It wasn't about revenge or pride. It was about finishing what we started, even if I had to do it alone. When I got back, I started changing things. I tore down the wallpaper we had chosen together, the one with soft blue patterns she loved. I replaced it with plain white walls, the color of quiet beginnings. I took down the framed wedding photo that hung in the hallway and put up a picture of my dad and me fishing at Lake Erie. That photo became my reminder that love doesn't always have to end in leaving. Sometimes it just changes shape. Every corner of the house still carried her shadow. The space beside the coffee pot where her mug used to sit, the faint trace of her perfume in the hallway, the blanket she always wrapped around herself during movie nights folded neatly on the couch. I tried to ignore them, but grief has a way of sneaking into the smallest details. Some nights I caught myself talking to her out loud, asking if she ever thought about me, if she missed the life we had. Of course, there was no answer. Work became my distraction. I started taking extra shifts, filling every hour to keep from thinking. I spent weekends fixing things around the house, mowing the lawn, repainting the porch. Each task felt like therapy, a slow reclaiming of what she left behind. The neighbors stopped asking about her eventually. I think they could sense the truth I never said out loud. Then one afternoon, I found a small box she had left behind in the attic. Inside were old photos, movie tickets, and a card she wrote on our first anniversary. It said, "You're my home." I sat there staring at those words, realizing how cruel irony can be. She had once called me her home, yet she was the one who walked away from it. Time did what time always does. The ache softened, the silence turned less heavy, and the house stopped feeling haunted. I began to cook again, invite friends over, even laugh without feeling guilty about it. The blanket on the couch stopped being hers and simply became another thing that belonged to me. One evening, I watched the sunset from the porch. The sky turned gold, and the maple trees' leaves shimmered in the light. I realized I no longer saw her face in every reflection. The house didn't feel like a grave anymore. It felt like a clean page. Losing her didn't destroy me. It stripped me down to who I really was before I started measuring my worth by someone else's happiness. The walls, the rooms, the quiet, they all became mine again. And for the first time since she left, I felt something real. Not anger, not regret, just peace. A year later, the maple tree we planted had grown taller than the porch roof. Its branches stretched toward the sky like it had been waiting for something to change. The seasons had come and gone, and with each one, the pain faded a little more. The house no longer felt like a place I was surviving in. It felt like something I was rebuilding from the inside out. I had repainted the living room, this time a warm shade of beige that made the morning light softer. The walls no longer carried her laughter, but they didn't echo with loneliness either. I started jogging every morning through the neighborhood. The same streets that once felt like reminders of loss became paths that gave me peace. The rhythm of my footsteps was steady, almost meditative, and I found myself breathing easier with each run. I learned how to cook beyond instant noodles and takeout. Sunday mornings became my ritual. I brewed coffee, made pancakes, and opened the windows to let the smell of fresh air drift in. I stopped expecting her to walk through the door. Instead, I filled the silence with music, the kind that matched my new pace of life. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. One evening, after work, I sat on the porch with a cold drink and watched the sunset bleed orange across the sky. My phone buzzed beside me. The screen showed a name I hadn't seen in a year. It was Lauren. The message was simple. She said she had driven past our old neighborhood and that the house looked beautiful. She hoped I was doing okay. For a few seconds, I just stared at it. My chest tightened, but it wasn't the same ache I used to feel. It was something quieter, almost tender. I typed back, "It still is," then deleted the chat. I didn't want to reopen a door that no longer led anywhere. That night, I sat on the porch longer than usual, listening to the crickets and watching the maple leaves move in the breeze. I thought about how she had gone searching for happiness, as if it were a destination marked on a map. I used to think the same way. I thought happiness was something you reached when everything lined up perfectly. But now I knew better. Happiness isn't found. It's built piece by piece through the small things you choose to do right after everything falls apart. I started keeping a small journal, not for her, but for me. I wrote about things I learned, like how forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back in, but simply letting them stop living in your head. I wrote about how peace doesn't come from closure. It comes from understanding that not every story needs an ending shared by two people. Work got better too. My boss noticed the change in me, the focus, the calm. I got promoted, not because I was trying harder, but because I finally had the energy to care again. I went out with friends, reconnected with my family, and visited my parents more often. My mother said she could see the old spark in my eyes again. That meant more than she knew. Sometimes I still catch glimpses of her in random moments. A song on the radio, the scent of her favorite shampoo in a grocery aisle. But instead of pain, it brings a soft kind of gratitude. She was a chapter that ended, but it helped write the rest of me. On the first anniversary of her leaving, I stood under the maple tree we planted together. I noticed how strong its trunk had grown, how deep its roots had gone. I realized I had done the same. I had stopped waiting for someone to come back and started showing up for myself instead. Now, when I mow the lawn or sit on the porch at sunset, I don't think about what I lost. I think about what stayed. The roof over my head, the lessons I learned, the person I became. I no longer needed her to tell me the house looked beautiful. I could see it myself, inside and out. Peace didn't arrive in one moment. It grew quietly like that tree, steady and unnoticed, until one day I looked around and realized I was happy. Not the kind of happiness that depends on someone else staying, but the kind that comes from finally knowing who you are when everyone else is gone. And that, I learned, is more than enough.